I'm Emma Clark, 29 years old, and I never expected to become the villain of a family vacation I had spent weeks planning. We were only supposed to relax at a cabin in Maine by the lake. Nothing complicated, just quiet time together. But by the second day, my sister told me I'd ruined everything. My father wouldn't even look me in the eye. And my mother, she just sat there trying to keep the peace again. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of her voice when she said, "We need you here before I tell you what happened." Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and tap, like if you've ever been expected to hold a family together while quietly falling apart. I grew up in a town just outside New Haven, Connecticut. Nothing fancy, just long winters, little diners and neighbors who waved. Even if they didn't know your name, my parents, Diane and Richard Clark, raised us to be polite and modest. Richard taught high school chemistry for 30 years. Mom worked part-time at the library then. Stayed home when Melissa and I were little. Melissa was the older one. The bright one, always smiling, always the center of attention by third grade. She'd already charmed the lunch ladies into giving her extra cookies. She made friends without trying, always knew what to say, always had someone calling her on the house phone. I was quieter. I liked checklists, reading cookbooks, sitting beside Mom, folding laundry on Saturday mornings. By high school, Melissa was prom queen, captain of the swim team, and everybody's favorite storyteller. Meanwhile, I kept a 3.8 GPA, made dinner when Mom didn't feel well, and ironed Dad's shirts before parent-teacher night. I wasn't jealous, not really, but there was this quiet expectation that I wouldn't need much. I wouldn't ask for help. I'd just keep things running after college. Melissa floated through 3 majors, changed schools twice, and then took a gap year to find herself in California. Mom and Dad funded it all without a blink. I put myself through state school with a part-time job and graduated with a degree in accounting. I found work in Hartford the week after commencement. Nobody threw a party. I just showed up Monday morning in a black blazer and kept going. A few years ago, Mom's health started slipping. Type 2 diabetes. Nothing sudden but enough to change everything. I researched her meds, sorted her appointments, tracked her glucose. When Dad got confused, Melissa called. Sometimes asked how Mom was, then launched into a story about a date gone wrong or her new boss who didn't get her creativity. She meant well, I think. But I handled the rest 3 months ago. We were sitting around the table for one of those rare dinners where everyone showed up. Mom had just come off a rough week of fatigue and missed dosages. Melissa lit up with this idea. "We should rent a cabin in Maine," she said, "right on the lake, like the Andersons did. It's quiet, peaceful. Mom could rest. We could all just be together for once." I remember the way Mom looked at her, hopeful, like it was the first time in weeks she had something to look forward to. I didn't say anything about work being busy or my worries about access to care. I just nodded and smiled while Melissa pulled out her phone to start looking at pictures. But then the weeks passed and Melissa never booked the place. She sent links but didn't follow through. Dad talked about fishing but didn't check for licenses. Mom got tired trying to help, so, like always, I took over. I booked the cabin, arranged meals, researched the nearest hospital, and took time off from a job that never gives it easily 2 days before the trip. Melissa called in a panic. She hadn't asked for time off at work. She wanted me to reschedule everything. I told her I couldn't. I'd already built everything around those dates and Mom's care and my work schedule too. She sighed, said she'd figure it out, but made it sound like I was making her suffer the night before we left. Packed our car down to the last detail, every medication labeled, every route mapped, every menu reviewed. I had Mom's insulin in a separate cooler, her monitoring kit double-checked. I stayed up till past midnight printing out hospital locations and restaurant menus. As I finally crawled into bed, I told myself maybe, just maybe, this trip would bring us together again. Maybe Dad would see what I do. Maybe Melissa would finally help. Maybe we'd laugh over dinner instead of arguing over everything. Maybe I didn't know that by the end of that week, I'd be packing a bag to leave the cabin 2 days early. The morning we left for Maine started early. I'd packed everything the night before, down to extra batteries for Mom's glucose monitor and a folder with her medication schedule printed in bold red ink. I pulled into my parents' driveway just after 7. The sky was clear and the air already warm for June. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She wore a light sweater and comfortable pants. Her arms looked thinner than they had last year, but her eyes were bright. She said, She'd been too excited to sleep and already had her bags by the door. Dad was in the kitchen with coffee and a fishing magazine. He greeted me with a nod and a quick ready-for-vacation mode. I started packing the cooler with snacks and drinks, checking again for Mom's sugar-free options. The plan was to leave by 8, sharp beat the traffic and make the 6-hour drive while it was still light out. But by 7:30, Melissa still hadn't arrived. Dad checked his watch twice, then called her. I heard her voice through the phone, chipper and casual, just finishing packing. "Give me 30 minutes tops." She lived 15 minutes away. She pulled in at 9:10 wearing oversized sunglasses and holding an iced coffee. Her suitcase was nearly twice the size of mine. She smiled wide and said she couldn't decide on shoes. Dad took her bags and started repacking the car to fit them. Mom beamed at her like she'd just walked off a wall. I'm a plane from Paris. We finally got on the road at 9:30. Melissa claimed the front seat, said she got carsick in the back, so I sat with Mom. She seemed comfortable enough, and it gave me a chance to keep an eye on her during the drive. We stopped at a diner in Massachusetts around noon. The place had shiny chrome stools and faded menus. Mom checked her blood sugar at the table, and I helped her choose something light, a grilled chicken salad. Melissa rolled her eyes when I suggested dressing on the side, said we were on vacation and Mom should enjoy herself. But Mom agreed with me, said the salad sounded just right. When the food came, Melissa sent her burger back, said it wasn't cooked right. We waited 15 more minutes while she got a replacement. Mom looked tired after lunch, her face pale. She said it was just the drive, but I made a mental note to keep a closer eye on her back on the road. Melissa dozed while Mom and I played word games out the window. The trees grew taller, and the towns smaller. By late afternoon, we turned onto a winding road lined with pine trees. The cabin appeared like something out of a magazine perched above a calm lake with a wraparound porch and tall windows that caught the light. "Oh my," Mom said as she stepped out of the car. "This is perfect." Even Melissa stopped scrolling her phone long enough to look impressed. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood and clean air. There were 3 bedrooms, one with a lake view, one small one at the back, and a larger room with its own bathroom. Melissa called dibs on the lake room. Dad said he and Mom would take the master, then turned to me. "You're okay with the back room, right?" It wasn't a question. I nodded and carried my bags down the short hallway. I set up Mom's medication station on the kitchen counter labeled "Everything Again" and tucked her glucose monitor beside the fridge by evening. Dad grilled chicken out on the deck, and we ate with the sunset, turning the lake gold. Mom sat close to Melissa and thanked her for suggesting the trip. Melissa smiled, said she was glad everyone liked it. No one mentioned that I'd done all the planning. The next morning I woke early. The light in the small room was soft through thin curtains. I could hear birds and the lake lapping against the dock. I brewed coffee and started breakfast. Blueberry pancakes, whole grain, Mom's favorite and safe for her if she didn't use too much syrup. By 7:30, Mom joined me in the kitchen, rested and in good spirits. "This smells amazing," she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. We talked quietly while I cooked. She said she'd slept better than she had in weeks. Dad came in next in his fishing gear, asked if the pancakes were for everyone. I nodded and poured another cup of coffee. We'd talked about doing a short hike around the lake before the heat of the day, nothing strenuous, just a beginner trail. I had a map printed out in the folder, along with a mini first aid kit and extra water. Mom was excited to go. She wrapped sandwiches while I packed up the cooler again, but by 8:30 there was still no sign of Melissa. Dad knocked on her door at 9 and got a sleepy. "I'll be ready in 15. It was nearly 11 when she finally appeared dressed and made up as if we were headed to brunch in the city. I suggested shortening the route, said it was already too warm for a full loop. Melissa pouted, said she wanted to see the lookout point. "Maybe tomorrow," I said. If we left on time, we set off with Dad leading the way, Mom walking carefully between breaks in the trees. The trail was shaded and quiet for a while. It felt peaceful but not far in. I noticed Mom's steps slowing her breathing heavier than usual. We stopped on a fallen log. She drank some water, said she was fine, just out of shape. Dad and Melissa circled back when they saw us, stopped. Dad asked if everything was okay. Mom smiled, said she was enjoying the view. We continued slower after that, stopping often to let her rest. By the time we got back to the cabin, it was nearly noon and the sun was high in the sky. Mom said she needed to lie down. I checked her blood sugar a little high but manageable. Dad went to try his luck fishing from the dock. Melissa disappeared to sunbathe. I stayed in and made lunch so it'd be ready when Mom woke up. We ate on the deck later. Dad showed off a picture of a small bass he'd caught. I suggested a seafood place for dinner I'd found online. Great reviews and plenty of diabetic-friendly options. Melissa had other plans. Said she met some locals who recommended a different place. The Lobster Trap. I asked if they had a suitable menu for Mom. Melissa rolled her eyes again. Said they probably had salad. Dad sided with her. Of course, said it was good to go, where locals suggested. Mom looked at me across the table, gave a little shrug. After lunch, Melissa disappeared again, came out later, freshly dressed, and said she might not come to the lighthouse tour the next day. Her new friends were taking her out on their boat. We planned that together. Mom said, her voice soft. I was looking forward to it. Melissa brushed it off, said they could do it another time. I said something, then quiet, but pointed. That she was making separate plans already, Melissa snapped. That I was being controlling. Dad told us both to let it go. The restaurant that night was loud and crowded. Mom had to settle for a plain grilled fish that came out dry. Melissa talked the whole time about Boston and her new friends. Dad laughed at her stories. Mom smiled through dinner, even when she barely touched her food. Later that evening, Melissa said she was going for a moonlight walk along the lake. She left before anyone could argue. Dad turned on the TV. Mom sat beside him with a book. I went to my room, lay in bed, and listened to the water against the dock. The first 2 days were over, and the trip already felt like something was unraveling. I wasn't sure if anyone else noticed or if it had always been this way. The third day started the way the others had with me in the kitchen before anyone else. I'd set out muffins and fruit, made coffee, and checked the forecast. The sky was clear and the air felt cooler than the day before. A perfect morning for the boat tour. Mom had been excited about since we booked it by 8:30. She and Dad joined me on the deck. Dad asked what time we needed to leave. I told him we should aim for 10:15. The marina was about 20 minutes away, and they asked us to arrive early for check-in. Mom looked rested. She checked her blood sugar and took her medication before sitting down with a muffin. She smiled and said, it reminded her of a bed and breakfast she'd once stayed at in Vermont at 9:30. Dad knocked on Melissa's door. There was no answer. He knocked again, then opened it slightly and came back to the deck. She's not there, he said, looking puzzled. Bed doesn't look slept in, either. Mom's smile faded. She asked. If he'd tried calling her, he had, but it went straight to voicemail. I packed the cooler anyway, filled it, with water and a few snacks we could bring on the boat. By 10, the car keys were still missing. Dad checked the usual spots, then his pockets, then the kitchen hook. We searched the cabin top to bottom. Finally, we looked at each other and realized Melissa had taken the car. Mom opened the fridge to double-check everything. Emma, she said slowly, where's my emergency insulin? The one we keep chilled. I moved quickly to the refrigerator door. The small insulated pouch wasn't there. I remembered packing it in the cooler bag labeled for emergencies, the one I'd left in the trunk for the boat tour. I felt the tightness in my chest before I could speak. Dad grabbed his phone and called Melissa again. His voice was sharper this time. You need to call us right now, he said into the voicemail. You've got Mom's insulin. We waited another 20 minutes, calling again and again. Mom assured us she was okay for now. Her morning dose had been taken, and her blood sugar was steady, as long as she avoided stress and heavy activity. But that didn't stop the tension from spreading through the room. I called the marina to cancel our tour. They told me we'd lose most of the deposit, but I couldn't risk getting stranded without her medication. The disappointment on Mom's face was quiet but deep. She said she understood. I believed her, but I also saw the way she looked toward the road every few minutes around 11:30. I found a water taxi service online, a small outfit that ran between cabins and the town's main dock. I called the number. A man named Ray said he could be there in 20 minutes. I explained the situation, and he offered to wait while we visited the pharmacy. He arrived in a modest motorboat and helped Mom aboard. Carefully, the lake was calm, and the ride into town was peaceful, despite everything he pointed out. a family of loons, and told us a story about a moose that once tried to steal someone's tackle box at the pharmacy. The clerk was understanding. Mom had her medical information on her phone, and they were able to give us a temporary dose of emergency insulin. It wasn't covered by our regular insurance, so the price was high. I paid it without thinking. Ray brought us back to the cabin around 2:30. The car still wasn't there. Mom sat down in the living room, looking worn out from the effort. Dad paced quietly by the front window. Just before 4, we heard tires on gravel. Melissa pulled up, looking cheerful. She stepped out, holding shopping bags, wearing a new sun hat, and humming to herself. Dad met her at the door. "Where have you been?" he asked firmly. "We've been trying to reach you for hours." She blinked. "My phone died." "I didn't realize anyone needed anything." I stepped in. "We had a boat tour today. You took the car without asking. And the cooler bag with Mom's emergency insulin was in the trunk." Her smile faded. "How was I supposed to know that?" she asked. "I thought the boat thing was tomorrow, even if it was." Dad said, "You didn't leave a note, and you knew we had plans." Mom stepped in gently. "We were worried, honey. I didn't know when you'd be back, and I didn't have what I needed." Melissa looked momentarily sorry, then brightened. "But I brought you something? Look." She held up one of the bags. "I found a handmade scarf at a little shop in town. I told her about the water taxi, the replacement insulin, the canceled tour." She said, "I was overreacting, that Mom was fine, that I should have told her what was in the car. You should have asked before taking it," I said quietly, "or left a note, or had your phone charged." Dad tried to settle things. "What's done is done. Let's just move forward." We had a late lunch on the deck. Melissa chatted about the shops and the friendly people she'd met. She didn't mention the missed calls or the trouble we'd gone through. Mom listened quietly and nodded when spoken to. She ate very little afterward. I found her sitting in her room checking her blood sugar. The number was higher than usual. I brought her some water and sat with her while she took her medication. She said it was just the stress from the day that she'd feel better after a rest. I said okay, but stayed nearby and kept checking the time just in case Melissa was on the deck, laughing into her phone. The noise grated more than usual. Dad came into the kitchen. "Emma," he said, "I know today was rough, but try not to be too hard on your sister. She's young and she's just trying to enjoy her time. She's 33, I said softly, "and Mom's health is not a background detail." He looked tired, said he'd talk to her again, asked me to help make dinner. I did, but kept glancing out the window toward the lake. Something in me had shifted, and I couldn't tell if it was just exhaustion or something bigger waiting underneath the surface. The next morning started gray and close with the kind of air that sticks to your skin. I opened the kitchen windows while the coffee brewed, hoping for a breeze that never came. We had planned a picnic lunch the day before, something simple and nearby, so Mom could enjoy the outdoors without overdoing it. I packed sandwiches with lean turkey, whole grain bread, fresh fruit, and a bean salad I made. That didn't need much dressing. Mom sat at the table wrapping the sandwiches carefully in wax paper while Dad searched through the cabin cabinets for paper plates and utensils. Melissa hadn't appeared yet. Her door was shut and quiet. Mom still knocked gently around 10. "We're planning a picnic if you'd like to come," she said to my surprise. The door opened almost immediately. Melissa was dressed already, scrolling through her phone with one hand. "What time are we going?" she asked. "About 11, Mom answered. "Perfect," Melissa said, not looking up. "Gives me time to finish some work emails by 10:45. We were packed and ready to leave. Mom's medication bag was with me, and Dad had loaded the cooler into a cart. We could pull along the short walk. Melissa came out just after 11, cheerful and still glued to her phone. "Oh, by the way," she said, "I invited a couple of friends to join us. They're bringing craft beer. Dad might like." I glanced at Mom. Her face didn't change much, just a brief flicker of surprise. Dad looked up. "The more the merrier," he said. "Sure," Mom added. "I'll grab a few extra plates." I didn't say anything. I mentally redid the head count. The food would stretch, but barely. We walked to the cove. Slowly, Mom moved steadily, and the rest of us carried the chairs. And bags. Melissa chatted with Mom about the shops her friends had told her about and the trails she still wanted to see. The cove was quiet. a patch of shade under tall trees, and one picnic table set back from the water. Dad helped Mom sit while I laid out the food. The dock nearby stretched into the lake, and that's where we saw the motorboat pull up. 3 people climbed out, 2 men and a woman, all close to our age. They waved and headed toward us with big smiles. Melissa waved back like she'd known them for years. "This is Jake and Troy," she said, "and Jake's sister Aubrey." They shook hands all around. Troy handed Dad a 6-pack of locally brewed IPA, and Jake launched right into a story about how they'd grown up spending summers on the lake. We sat down to eat the beer, got opened, and the group spread out around the table. Jake noticed Mom passing on a few items and asked, "Are you on a special diet or something?" Melissa mentioned health issues, but left it vague, just managing diabetes. Mom said gently, "Nothing serious." Jake nodded. "My uncle had that lost part of his foot," he said. "Nasty stuff." I watched Mom's face tighten slightly. I leaned in. "She's doing fine with her treatment plan," I said evenly. "You should try these supplements." Jake said they really helped my uncle stabilize his levels. "My buddy sells them. I can get you some." Mom smiled politely. "I prefer my doctor's recommendations." Jake shrugged. "Those drug companies don't want you cured, they want you hooked." I didn't reply. Troy passed around a flask of something stronger than beer. Dad and Melissa each took a sip. Aubrey poured herself some too. Mom and I declined. As the meal went on, their volume rose. Troy and Jake joked loudly. Melissa laughed with them, like she'd known them forever. Aubrey chatted with Mom for a bit and asked about the cabin, then turned to Melissa for stories. "Tell them about that time you stole your dad's car in high school," Troy said. Melissa launched into a story I'd never heard about, sneaking out to a party and bringing the car back before dawn. "Dad never found out," she said, laughing. But Mom caught me and made me promise not to do it again. Mom blinked. "Melissa, that's not." Melissa cut her off. "You said it'd be our little secret." Mom didn't reply. She just looked down at her plate. Troy and Jake stood and started tossing a frisbee around the table. They missed twice. The second throw knocked over Dad's cup and splashed water across the food. No one apologized. I wiped the table while Mom leaned back, looking pale. I checked her sugar discreetly, lower than it should have been. I asked if she was okay. "I should probably eat something more filling," she said quietly. I stood. "We're going to head back," I said. "Mom needs rest." Melissa frowned. "We just got here." Aubrey looked at Mom. "She doesn't look great. Maybe you should." Jake waved his hand. "She's fine. Give her a granola bar or something." I turned to Mom. "Let's go." Melissa didn't move. "Emma, stop being so dramatic," she said. "Mom, are you really not feeling well, or is she just doing this again?" Mom hesitated, then said, "I am a little tired." "You can stay," she added quickly. "Dad can help me back. We should all go," I said, glancing at the table. The food was ruined. "Anyway," Troy chimed in, "why not come back to the cabin? We've got more beer and the deck looks perfect for relaxing." "We have plans later," I said. "Thank you, though." "We don't have plans," Melissa interrupted. "They should come hang out." Dad finally spoke. "Your mother needs to rest today. Might not be the best time for company." Melissa's face tightened. "Fine, but I'm staying with them. I'll catch a ride later." The walk back was quiet. Dad helped Mom. I carried the cooler. Melissa didn't offer to help. Once home, I got Mom settled in and made her a light meal. She took her medication and rested. Dad stayed with her while I cleaned up around 6. I heard the motorboat again. I looked out the window, saw the same group climbing onto our dock, laughing and carrying drinks. Dad joined me at the window. "Looks like Melissa brought them anyway," he said. "Mom needs rest," I said. "They shouldn't be here." He nodded slowly. "I'll talk to her." I stayed in the kitchen watching from inside. Dad spoke to Melissa at the dock. She gestured with her hands, clearly upset. Then Dad turned and said something to Jake, who shrugged. A few minutes later, they all came up onto the deck. Melissa smiled. "We'll stay outside," she said. "You don't have to join us if you don't want to." I could hear them through the open window. The music, the laughter, the clink of bottles. Mom stayed in the bedroom with the door closed. Aubrey came in to use the bathroom on her way out. She paused. "Your sisters?" "Something else," she said. "She told us you guys own a bunch of vacation homes and your dad runs some big business that's not true." "That's I said, "He's a retired teacher." She looked confused. "She said you were thinking of buying property up here." I didn't answer. She left before I could say more. Outside, Troy called out, "So when do we get that fancy dinner you promised us?" "Mel." Melissa laughed. "Emma will make something she loves playing house mother. It's her whole thing." I stepped outside. "Melissa, can I talk to you inside?" She waved me off. "Just say it. I'm not cooking dinner for your friends. They've been loud. Mom is resting and they've been disrespectful since they arrived." Jake sat up. "We're just having fun. This is a family vacation," I said. "And Mom is sick." Melissa stood. "You don't decide who's welcome here. This isn't your place." Dad cleared his throat. "Emma has a point. We need to keep things quiet tonight." Melissa stared at him. "You're taking her side." Troy stood. "We'll leave." "Come on, Mel. You can crash at my place. She's not going anywhere," I said. "Not like this. Not after drinking all day. I'm 33, Melissa snapped. "You don't tell me what to do." Dad raised his voice. "You're staying here tonight. Your friends need to leave." What followed wasn't loud, but it was ugly. Melissa argued. Her friends shuffled out of the cabin. Jake mumbled something under his breath. Troy lingered a moment before following the others. Melissa slammed her door. Dad sat heavily in the nearest chair. Mom came out of the bedroom, her eyes red but dry. "I just wanted a nice week together," she said quietly. I sat beside her. I know the tension in the room felt like something that wouldn't lift soon, and something inside me had started to settle. Not with relief, but with a quiet certainty. I didn't want to keep living like this. The fifth morning brought drizzle and quiet, the kind that settles into the walls and lingers. Dad and Mom were already sitting at the kitchen table when I came out of my room. Their voices dropped when they saw me, but neither said anything right away. I poured coffee and joined them. "How are you feeling this morning?" I asked Mom. She gave a small smile. Better after a good night's rest, but her shoulders were hunched in that way that said things still felt heavy. Melissa's door stayed shut even as we cleaned up breakfast. Dad suggested a trip to the lighthouse, the one listed in the local guidebook. The rain's supposed to clear by noon. He said we could grab lunch in town after. I nodded. It's supposed to have a great little maritime museum, too. We were trying. We were all trying. Melissa came out just after 10. She looked tired, her voice flat. "What's the plan today?" Dad explained. The lighthouse trip carefully, like he was walking across a thin patch of ice. Melissa sipped her coffee slowly, then said, "I actually made other plans. Jake and Troy are picking me up at noon. They're taking me to some hidden beach locals. Only kind of spot?" The air shifted a little in the room. Mom looked up. "We'd really like to do something as a family today. We haven't had much time together this week." Melissa didn't look at her. "I've spent plenty of time with everyone. I just want one day to relax with people who actually have fun." Dad tried again. "Maybe your friends could wait until tomorrow." "We'd love it if you came with us today. After yesterday," Melissa said. "You mean after Emma embarrassed me and made a scene after you kicked out? The only people making this trip bearable." I didn't answer right away, but I could feel it building in my chest, the same thing that had been pressing down since the first day we arrived. After they dismissed Mom's health needs. "Drank on our deck and left us cleaning up their mess," I said. "They're not friends, Melissa. You met them 3 days ago." She laughed without humor. "Here comes St. Emma, again, always so perfect, always ready to control everything." She turned toward Mom. "You're fine, right? You didn't actually need anything yesterday." That Emma didn't exaggerate. Mom's voice was quiet but steady. "I had a low reading. It wasn't nothing." Melissa crossed her arms. "I just want to have a normal vacation without all this drama. We came here for a family trip," I said, "and you've spent most of it doing your own thing or dragging strangers into it." "Oh, please," she said. "Mom is fine. You're just using her to justify bossing everyone around." Dad stepped in. "Let's all calm down." But I couldn't. This time, it wasn't just a bad day or a single misunderstanding. It was the weight of all the years before this one. "Do you even know what Mom's gone through this year?" I asked. "Do you know how scared she was when she was hospitalized in March?" Melissa stared at me. "I sent flowers. I called for 5 minutes," I said. "And then you had to run to a party. I live further away than you do, and I still made it to the hospital." Her voice was sharp now. "So what?" I'm not family unless I drop everything. You're family when it's convenient for you, I said. When you need something, when you want attention, but not when anyone else does. She turned to Mom and Dad. Are you really going to let her talk to me like this? Dad hesitated, then said Emma, maybe we can all take a breath. No, I said, because every time we do this, it ends the same way. We tiptoe around Melissa. We let things slide and nothing changes. Mom looked down but didn't speak. Melissa's eyes were glassy but hard. You think you're so much better because you plan things and pack snacks and make checklists, but nobody asked you to do all that. No, I said I did it because someone had to, and it was never going to be you. Dad started to speak, but I kept going. You've never shown up unless it benefited you. Not when you were 16 and Mom and Dad had to lie for you. Not when you ran up credit card bills. Not now, when Mom's health should matter more than your social calendar. Melissa looked stunned for a second, then angry. You've ruined this whole vacation with your rules and your judgment and your constant need to be right. Mom stood up slowly. I am not fine, she said. I haven't been fine for months. The room went still. Her voice stayed calm but firm. My blood sugar is unstable. I'm tired all the time, and this trip was supposed to be a break. Instead, I've been stressed every single day. Dad put a hand on her back, but she didn't lean into him. She looked at both of us. I love you both, she said, but this week has shown me that we have to stop pretending this is working. Melissa stepped back like she'd been slapped after everything I did to make this fun. You're blaming me. What did you do? I asked. You found a cabin and handed off the rest. You've done nothing but make it harder for Mom and act like you're the only one who matters. You want a gold star for being responsible, she said. Go ahead. Just don't expect everyone to thank you for being miserable. Dad finally spoke clearly. That's enough. Melissa, Emma has done everything she could to make this trip good for your mother and the rest of us, and you've dismissed it at every turn. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed again. You're all against me, she said. Even you. We're asking you to look beyond yourself, Mom said. That's not the same thing as being against you. Melissa pointed at me. She's the one who embarrassed me and tried to make me feel small. She's the reason everything fell apart. The silence. After that was deep, I stood still. Then I said quietly, I'm leaving tomorrow. Mom looked up. What not today? I said. But tomorrow morning, I'm going to pack my things and go back home early. I'll come back to help you pack up if you want, or Dad can drive you. But I can't stay here anymore. Melissa scoffed. So you didn't get your way, and now you're abandoning us. I'm walking away from something that isn't healthy, I said. This trip has turned into more work than rest, and I'm done being the one who holds everything together without anyone noticing. Dad looked pained. Emma. I shook my head. I've made my decision. I'll help with dinner tonight and breakfast in the morning, then I'm going. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. We need you here. And that's the problem, I said gently. I'm needed, but not seen, not heard, not appreciated. Melissa rolled her eyes. So dramatic. Always the victim, no. I said, I'm just done playing the role you expect me to play. Dad didn't argue again. He just looked down at the table outside. We heard the sound of a boat approaching. Melissa's phone chimed with a text. That's Jake and Troy, she said. I'm going with them. Don't wait up. She grabbed her bag and walked out without another word. The door shut behind her, and the only sound left was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant lap of water against the dock. The cabin felt hollow. After Melissa left, the door had barely clicked shut before Mom eased into her chair again, her face pale and tired. Dad paced near the window, not speaking, just staring out at the dock where the boat had disappeared. I'll make coffee, I said, not sure what else to do. I needed something to put my hands on, something to fill the silence. I pulled the filter from the machine and rinsed it under the tap, then reached for the canister of grounds, the morning routine somehow more grounding now than it had been at breakfast. Dad stepped into the kitchen as the water heated. You really meant what you said about leaving tomorrow. I nodded, but kept my eyes on the counter. I need to go home, Dad. I have work, and I just can't stay in this anymore. He didn't argue. Not this time. I'm sorry, Emma, he said quietly, like he hadn't said it aloud in years. I didn't see how much we were putting on you. I poured the water and set the machine running. Mom joined us slowly, her steps careful. "I've leaned on you too much," she said, "especially since the diagnosis. I wanted to help." I said I still do. I glanced at her but kept my tone even, but I need to know it's not always going to fall on me because no one else will step up. "You're right," she said, her voice soft but sure. "We need to change that." The coffee finished brewing and I poured 3 cups, setting them down at the table. Dad sat down with a sigh that seemed to let go of something heavy. The lighthouse trip was abandoned. None of us said it, but it hung in the air unspoken. Instead, we stayed around the cabin. Dad cleaned up some fishing gear in the shed. Mom read on the couch. I checked emails and did a few work calls from my laptop. The stillness was strange but welcome. We had dinner early that evening, a quiet meal of roasted vegetables and leftover chicken afterward. I stepped out onto the deck. The sky was streaked with orange and deep blue, the lake calm beneath it. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the pine-scented air. For once, there was no sound of music, no strangers laughing, just quiet. Mom came to join me a few minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Sleep okay?" "Last night," she asked. I nodded better than I expected. She sipped her tea and looked out over the water. "I told your father some hard things after you left yesterday," she said, "things I should have said a long time ago." I glanced over. "How did he take it better than I thought?" she said. "He admitted he's been too easy on Melissa and too hard on you." The words settled between us. I hadn't expected them, but hearing them mattered. "Do you think things will actually change?" I asked. She took a moment before answering. "Not overnight, but we've taken the first steps." We stood there for a while, not talking, just watching the sky deep into dusk. Sometime after 9, we heard a car in the driveway. Dad stepped to the window. Melissa's back. She came in alone, her face unreadable. "You're back," I said from the kitchen. "Mom had a health scare yesterday," I added. When she didn't answer, Dad had to take her to the clinic. Her eyes widened. "Why didn't anyone call me?" I paused. "Would you have picked up?" Mom gave me a quick look that said be careful, but didn't interrupt. Melissa looked between us then, to Mom. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine now," Mom said. "Just tired." Melissa walked over and perched on the arm of the couch. "I'm sorry I wasn't here." Her tone was quiet, the usual sharpness gone. She stayed for dinner. The 4 of us moved through the evening like we were sharing the same space, but not quite the same mood. We were careful choosing words like walking barefoot across stones. After the dishes were done, Melissa joined me outside on the deck. "I didn't know Mom was sick," she said. "I would have come back if I'd known." "I believe you," I said. And to my surprise, I meant it. She leaned on the railing beside me, looking out at the lake. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about me never stepping up." I waited. "You're right," she said. "I'm not good at being reliable. It's easier to be the fun one. Nobody expects anything real from me. Just laughs and stories." I didn't jump in. I let her keep going. "I'm not saying that excuse is everything," she added, "but I see now how that let me off the hook for a lot, and it put everything on you without anyone realizing it." I nodded slowly. "I don't need you to become me," I said. "I just need you to be present when it matters. Especially for Mom." "I'll try," she said. "I mean it." It wasn't perfect, but it was more than she'd offered before. "So where do we go from here?" she asked. "One day at a time," I said, "starting with making the last 2 days of this trip about Mom, not us." She nodded. "I can do that," and she did. The next morning, she helped Mom with her breakfast. Checked in without being asked. She stayed through lunch, offered to make tea, even asked if Mom needed her prescription, organized. Dad too shifted in small ways, asking me before making plans, offering to help without prompting. And when Melissa was late to breakfast on our final day, he gave her a look that said things were changing that night as we packed. Mom pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For speaking up, even when it was hard." I hugged her. "I'm sorry I left you." "Don't be," she said. "That choice changed more than you know." We loaded the cars early the next morning. Dad drove the SUV with Mom. I rode with Melissa in her rental. His suggestion, we started out in silence, but eventually the conversation turned. "I used to be jealous of how close you are to Mom," Melissa said somewhere between the lake and the freeway. I glanced over. "I used to envy your freedom." We both laughed, soft and unsure. "You make grown-up life look easy," she said, "like you were born knowing how to do everything." "I'm winging it just like everyone else," I said. "I just happen to carry a lot of checklists. You worried about doing something wrong," she said. "I thought that was my job." We laughed again this time with less weight behind it. It wasn't resolution, but it was something new. A start. The morning light filtered softly through the cabin's windows as I sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee in the quiet before anyone else stirred. The air held a fragile stillness, the kind that settles just before something shifts. I could hear faint footsteps above Melissa moving around in her room, perhaps trying to gather her thoughts as much as her things. Dad was already up, humming low, as he packed a small bag by the front door. Mom sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, eyes tired but steady. There was something in the way she looked at me this morning that felt like an unspoken understanding. Neither of us wanted to say the words, but they were there between us. When Melissa finally came down, she looked different, less guarded, but still carrying the weight of the days behind her. She didn't meet my eyes, but nodded stiffly as she passed. The tension in the room was thick, but it wasn't the same sharpness from before. It felt quieter, more uncertain. We moved through the final moments of the vacation with careful politeness, packing cars and loading luggage, the usual noise of preparation muted under the surface. Dad talked softly about the route home, asking if anyone wanted to stop for breakfast along the way. Mom declined, her voice gentle but firm, saying she just wanted to get back to her own bed. As we settled into the cars, Dad took the wheel of the SUV with Mom beside him, and I found myself riding shotgun in Melissa's rental. The drive began in silence, the road stretching out under the morning sun, warm but not yet hot. After a while, Melissa spoke, her voice hesitant. "I guess I've been thinking a lot about what you said on the trip. About responsibility, about being there when it counts." I nodded, watching the trees blur past. "It's not about being perfect. It's about being present." She glanced over, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I'm tired of feeling like the fun one, the one who never has to deal with the hard stuff. Maybe I've been running from that more than I realized." Her words caught me off guard, not because I didn't expect her to resist, but because there was an honesty there I hadn't seen before. "I don't expect you to change overnight," I said softly. "We all have our own pace. But this is a start." Melissa smiled, small and tentative. "Yeah, a start." The conversation eased after that, slowly unfolding like the road before us. We talked about the things that had been left unsaid for years, the jealousy, the misunderstandings, the hopes we both had but never shared aloud. "I always thought you had it all figured out," she admitted at one point, "like adulting was easy for you." I laughed quietly. "Far from it. I'm just better at hiding the mess." Her laughter joined mine, breaking the long silence. For the first time in years, it felt like the walls between us were cracking. By the time we pulled into our neighborhood, the heaviness had lifted enough for tentative smiles and quieter voices. Melissa dropped me off at my apartment before heading to her place. We promised to talk soon, really talk, without the usual defenses. That night, I sat alone on my porch, the cool air brushing against my skin. The trip hadn't gone as I'd hoped. It hadn't been the perfect vacation or the easy reconciliation I'd dreamed of. But something deeper had shifted, a small seed planted in rocky soil. I realized that healing would take time, patience, and more honest conversations. But I also knew this was the moment where things could begin to change. Tomorrow we'd all step back into our routines. The old patterns wouldn't vanish overnight. But for the first time, I felt ready to meet whatever came next with new boundaries, clearer voices, and a quiet hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Back at home, the days moved quietly like gentle ripples on a lake after the storm has passed. I found myself returning to routines, work errands, Sunday calls with Mom. But something subtle had shifted. The sharpness that used to sit under every conversation felt softened, now replaced by a tentative kind of understanding. A week after the trip, Mom called on a Thursday evening. Her voice sounded lighter than it had in months. She told me about a new recipe she was trying and asked if I might come by for dinner that weekend. When I arrived, Dad was already at the table setting out plates, and Melissa showed up not long after carrying a bouquet of sunflowers from the farmer's market. It was a small gesture, but I noticed. We sat down together a little awkward at first, but there was no urgency to fill the silence. Over baked chicken and roasted carrots. Conversation drifted easily. No one tiptoed around old wounds. Dad shared stories from his classroom. Mom described her latest book. Melissa and I traded updates, work friends, the everyday pieces of our lives. There were no grand confessions, no apologies spelled out in so many words, but kindness had crept in around the edges. After dinner, as Mom and I cleared the dishes, she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, for helping us see each other more clearly. I squeezed her fingers gently, knowing what she meant. Sometimes love shows up in the courage it takes to speak, and sometimes in the strength to listen. As summer rolled into fall, I saw changes taking root. Melissa started calling Mom on weekday mornings just to check in. Dad asked for my help planning a short weekend trip for the two of them. I set firmer boundaries at work, made space for rest, and found a bit more peace in my own company. It wasn't a perfect family. There were still disagreements and the occasional misstep, but now we met each other with a little more grace, a little less expectation. Looking back, I realized the family vacation I thought was ruined had given us all something more valuable than easy memories. It forced us to reckon with old patterns, to risk honesty and vulnerability, and in doing so, made room for something better, real connection rooted in respect and care. If you've ever wondered whether setting boundaries or speaking your truth could cost you the love of those closest to you, let me offer this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is honor your own needs. In doing so, you open the door for real understanding, first from yourself, then from others. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of your own journey, I hope you'll share your experience in the comments or with someone you trust. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd be glad to have you here next time.